Hi, this is Mike Gant, and this is episode 23 of Bible Studies, and we're studying the book of Acts, and today we begin with Acts chapter 3 and verse 11. We have been reading the last few verses about the man who was lame, who had been laid at the gate of the temple, and the gate called Beautiful, and he has been healed, and so that's where we pick it up. Verse 11 says, while he was clinging to Peter and John, all the people ran together to them at the so-called Portico of Solomon, full of amazement, because people who were going to the temple remembered this guy. They had seen him there, and you couldn't deny it. It wasn't like they didn't know the guy, didn't know anything about it. No, they knew the guy, and maybe they didn't know him by name, but they know him from seeing there, and they knew he couldn't walk, and they knew he begged. And so here he is walking and leaping and praising God, as we read last time. Verse 12, all these people full of amazement come to him. It says, but when Peter saw this, he replied to the people, men of Israel, why are you amazed at this? It said they were full of amazement. He says, why are you amazed at this? Or why do you gaze at us as if by our own power or piety we had made him walk? Now, Jesus never said anything like that when he healed people. He said different things, but he didn't say that. He said, why are you looking at me? I didn't have anything to do with it. No, he had everything to do with it. But Peter wants to make sure that people don't think that he and John did this in the same way that Jesus had done it. In fact, he's going to go on and make the point that it was Jesus through them who had done it once again, just like he did when he was alive. He says here, verse 13, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Now those are ancestors that all these people had in common, because he said men of Israel. And Peter and John themselves were Israelites, were Jews, were descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. He says, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the God of our fathers, me, John, all of you, has glorified his servant Jesus, the one whom you delivered and disowned in the presence of Pilate when he had decided to release him. Pilate was a Roman, a Gentile, and it was the people who said, crucify him, crucify him. Now, some people historically have gotten into anti-Semitic stuff, and there's no historical basis for getting into that. All these people that were involved here were Jews. Now, Pilate wasn't, but Jesus was, and Peter was, and John was, and all the supporters of Jesus and all the opponents of Jesus were Jews. It was entirely an inter-Jewish affair. So to come away from this and said the Jews did right or the Jews did wrong it's kind of shows your ignorance of the history. It was all Jews, and then later on expanded out to the Gentiles. The Gentiles at that time, like Pontius Pilate, they didn't care. They didn't care about Jesus. They didn't care about the Jewish Messiah. They didn't care about any of that stuff. They just wanted people to shut up and do what they're supposed to, and they were afraid a riot. Pilate was afraid that a riot would get out of hand, and he didn't want to have to deal with it. So that's why he went ahead and catered to the public will at the time. The public having been stirred up by the Jewish leaders who were threatened. They felt envy. They didn't want Jesus taking their power. Verse 14, but you disowned the holy and righteous one and asked for a murderer to be granted to you. That was Barabbas he's talking about there. But put to death the Prince of Life, the one whom God raised from the dead, a fact to which we are witnesses. We've seen that word witnesses in all three of the first three chapters of Acts. The word witnesses has shown up. That's a key point. These apostles were witnesses. They had seen Jesus. They could bear witness to what he did. They were actually they were giving testimony. They were declaring history. This has happened. He was raised from the dead. We saw him. We touched him. We ate and drank with him. So this Jesus, whom they're testifying, is alive again. Now, as I record this, we're about 2 weeks out from the assassination of Charlie Kirk. You'll probably be watching this. Well, you'll be watching this sometime after that. The soonest after that will probably be a month, maybe, because there's just a lag as to when these things are. I do them in advance, and then they're published. And I do them in advance because you never know when something's going to come up, and I'm going to miss some, and I don't want them to be delayed. So I have enough of a backlog that there's always something to publish. But we're about 2 weeks out from when Charlie was killed. The memorial service was held several days ago. And one of the points that a lot of people have been making is they've offered tributes to Charlie and to Jesus, whom he so often and so well represented, that killing the messenger sometimes makes the messenger even more important, that the messenger becomes stronger. They've quoted, there's an old saying about when a tyrant dies, his rule comes to an end, but when a martyr dies, his rule is just beginning. And they've made other points like you cannot snuff a movement out if you kill the people that will just get stronger. Well, that all sounds good, and it does happen sometimes, and I certainly hope that it happens with Charlie Kirk. But that's not the normal way things happen. The normal way things happen is that when you want to stop a movement, you kill the leaders, and that usually stops it pretty well. And if it didn't work so well, people wouldn't use that as a method so much of the time. So while I hope that the things that Charlie believed in will be strengthened and made stronger by what happened, but that's not automatic. People have to respond to that. And in the case with Jesus, and people have used Jesus as an illustration of this at times, but with Jesus, we have to understand that it's because he wasn't really dead. It's because he was raised from the dead and went to heaven. And he operated from there. When he was on earth, he received the Holy Spirit, did miracles by the Holy Spirit. When he went to heaven, he received the Holy Spirit. The Holy Spirit's now his to give, not his to benefit from directly or to rely upon, but to dispense to his followers. So that is what caused the movement of Jesus to gain strength. It wasn't the crucifixion by itself. In fact, it probably would have been snuffed out. Because think about it. How much historical data do we have about the apostles, most of whom, by the accounts we do have, died the same type of death that Jesus did? But we don't have we don't have 27 texts about all their lives. We don't have details about all their lives because they died in largely ignorance. We're historically ignorant a lot of those details. But in the case of Jesus, he had appointed apostles to tell his word, and he was directing them from heaven as they went about their duties. He was strengthening them when they would pray. He was strengthening them from heaven. And so the movement of Jesus was sustained and really took off in the wake, not of his crucifixion primarily, but of his resurrection. It was his resurrection after his crucifixion together. That's what made his life so powerful. And we have to remember that. So Peter is rightly giving all the credit for this miracle to Jesus, who is still alive. That's his point. We're witnesses. We saw him raised from the dead, but you just saw him heal this man, and that's even more proof that he's been raised from the dead.